The development of antibiotics. Penicillin. Alexander Fleming. Fleming was a chemist working in London at St Mary's Hospital. While conducting experiments in 1928, he noticed that the bacteria he was growing in a petri dish was being attacked and killed by a mould. This was entirely by chance and ruined his experiment, but Fleming decided to try and work out what the mystery mould was. He found out that the mould was an excellent antibiotic, penicillin, but he only tested it on bacteria in the laboratory. In 1929, Fleming published his findings, but he could not get funding to continue his research into the mould, so he returned to his original work. Penicillin was difficult to grow or produce, so it did not seem practical to try and use it in medicine. The work of Florey and Chain. Howard Florey and Ernst Chain were two scientists working at Oxford University. They had read about Fleming's work and the paper he had written in 1929. Florey and Chain decided to set up a research team to develop penicillin. They carried out a range of experiments. In 1940, they tested penicillin on mice, and in 1941, they carried out experiments on a patient. A policeman called Albert Alexander had been cut by a rose and developed blood poisoning. He was dying, but when given penicillin, he made a miraculous recovery. Unfortunately, there was not enough of the drug, and he eventually died. Florey and Chain even tried recycling penicillin from a patient's urine. They found that penicillin worked really well on people dying from infections, but they only had a small amount of penicillin, and so when the penicillin ran out, the patient died. Florey and Chain were determined to produce more penicillin, but they found it could not be synthesized from chemicals like salvaricin 606 or Prontosil. The mould had to be cultured or grown and exposed to the air. They carried out further experiments to try and grow penicillin, including milk containers, baths, bedpans, and food tins. They even hired 6 extra staff to deal with trying to grow the penicillin. No British firm had the technology to mass-produce penicillin, and this was partly due to the fact that many factories were damaged by bombing raids in World War II, because that had begun, and they were also working flat out on the war effort. The mass production of penicillin. In June 1941, Florey and Norman Heatley, another member of the research team, went to the United States to see if pharmaceutical companies there could fund their research. In December 1941, the US had already entered World War II, and so the US government was prepared to fund their research because they knew that many soldiers would die from infection rather than actual injuries. If penicillin could be mass-produced, it could save many lives. Government and pharmaceutical companies began to invest in mass-producing penicillin. In Britain and the US, government committees were established to organize cooperation on developing penicillin. The US government even paid $75 million to help companies install expensive equipment. Florey discovered that growing the mold at low temperatures was the best way of purifying penicillin. The drug company Pfizer became involved and started experiments to mass-produce penicillin at an old ice cream factory in New York. They found that the best way to mass-produce penicillin was by using an old ice cream freezer to develop a method of freeze-drying that was eventually used. Through experimentation, Pfizer found that penicillin could be grown in corn syrup, which was oxygenated. In 1943, Allied armies began using penicillin. Also in 1943, Florey went to Russia to explain how penicillin was made and used to give them samples. By 1944, there was enough penicillin for all those wounded in the D-Day invasion of Europe to be treated. Penicillin had arrived. Penicillin was the first antibiotic medicine and has since saved over 200 million lives.